several months ago, when David and I were leaving the meeting here and going to the bus, he says to me, talking about the discussion group, you're always bringing up the Gita, and the Gita says this and it says that. He says, nobody knows what you're talking about. People don't know what this Gita is. So I'm actually curious, right off the bat, if anybody here actually has read the Gita. And do people, even if you haven't read it or have any awareness of it, know about it a little bit? Anyway, I read, I probably first read it sometime back in 69 or 70, and I've gone back and read it many times and read it in different translations and commentaries and this and that. So I've lived with it for a long time, and I guess it has come to seem so familiar to me that I almost assume that it's better known than maybe it is.
What is the Gita?
Well, what is the Gita? She's going to give me trouble. The actual title, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad refers to the Lord or God, and Gita means simply song. So this is often translated as the song of our beloved Lord, or just the song of God, or something like that. And this refers to the fact that the whole thing takes place as a dialogue between Arjuna, who is the disciple, and Krishna, who is the embodiment of the divine on earth. So I just thought that that it would be good to give a little bit of the background and the story behind it, because I think it helps to understand what's going on. And when I first read it, I think I kind of skipped over this part. I just wanted to jump right to Krishna's teachings. But the story grounds it a little bit in the world, I think. Anyway, just briefly before I get to that, it is actually the first Sanskrit text that was translated into English in 1785, and it's been pretty well known in the Western world. It's a tiny little text. This little book, about 2/3 of it is actually the Gita, and it's a little piece that is inserted in what's called the Mahabharata, which is a big, voluminous text about the myths and the gods and the goddesses and the culture of India and all this. And some people think that actually the Gita was put in there later. And they think it was probably, people disagree when it was written, but somewhere between 500 BC and perhaps 100 years after the time of the Buddha. And some people think that parts of it are actually in kind of in reaction to some of the early Buddhist teachings. But anyway, to get back to just the backstory of it, what you find is that it's a dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna, but what's really unusual about it is it's a dialogue that is being given in the middle of a battlefield just as a huge battle is about to begin. So, and this battle has come about because there were two brothers named Dhritarashtra and Pandu, who were two of the kings, but Dhritarashtra was blind, so he could not act as king. So his brother Pandu acted as king. His brother Pandu had 5 sons, and Dhritarashtra has 100 sons. And these cousins are raised together as one big family. They're sharing the same teachers, the same gurus, and all this. But Pandu dies early. So his sons are then to take over the kingdom. And they are, you might say, they are the embodiment of Dharma. They are righteous in every way. On the other side, the Kauravas, who are Dhritarashtra's sons, are the embodiment of lack of Dharma, and particularly the eldest son, Duryodhana, who is he's just greedy, he's jealous, he's angry. All he wants to do is get this kingdom for himself. So at one point, he invites the Pandavas, who are these 5 sons of Pandu, to come to a festival. And he builds them a nice mansion to stay in at the festival, but he builds it all of the most flammable materials he can find. And the plan being to set it on fire and kill his cousin so that he can have the kingdom. Well, the Pandavas escape. So then he has another trick to get the kingdom, and the oldest of the Pandavas is often called Dharma Raja, meaning the king of Dharma, but he has one weakness, and his weakness is that he likes to gamble. So Duryodhana sets up a game of dice. The dice are loaded. He wins everything from Dharma Raja till finally he wins the whole kingdom. Finally, Dharma Raja even puts up the last thing they have, which is their wife, which is held in common by these 5 brothers. So Duryodhana wins the wife, tries to strip her naked in the court to humiliate her and all of them. And at this point, Dhritarashtra steps in and says, no, you can't do this, you know. So he sets it up that the Pandavas will go live in the forest for 12 years and then come back and live for 1 year undetected in society. And if they manage to do this, then they get their kingdom back. So they do it, they come back. Duryodhana still will not budge. Everybody tries all kinds of diplomacy, he won't budge. So the only thing left is this battle. So they are now arrayed to fight against each other. They're really a huge family feud, if you will. And Krishna, who is the embodiment of the divine, although not necessarily recognized as that, calls both of them and offers them to either have all his armies or to have him unarmed and vowed not to fight. And Arjuna has enough wisdom and insight that he wants Krishna on his side, whether he fights or not. And Duryodhana is really glad to get the armies because, you know, he thinks, you know, the power of arms is what means something to him. So there they are, the armies are arrayed on this battlefield. Krishna is driving Arjuna's chariot, and Arjuna asks him to take the chariot and place it between the 2 armies so that he can look and see, you know, what's going on, who's on what side. And he starts looking at the Kauravas, which is these 100 sons, and he sees his cousins, he sees his uncles, he sees his old gurus and teachers and the people he grew up with. And he suddenly says, I can't go into battle and kill all these members of my family. This isn't right. And he goes on at quite some length as to why this is not a dharmic thing to do. And he finally collapses on the floor of the chariot and says to Krishna, I can't fight. And at that point is where the real teaching of the Gita begins. And this first chapter is often called the yoga of the despondency of Arjuna. And it's called a yoga, which means a path to enlightenment or a path to God, or however you want to look at it. It's called a yoga because at this point, Arjuna is willing to open himself up to teaching. He's no longer thinking that he has the answers, that he knows what's right and wrong even. He realizes he cannot figure out with his mind what's right and wrong. So he says, essentially, Krishna, teach me. I'm in this total state of confusion. And when I came back to reading the Gita most recently, I was really struck with this image, which hadn't struck me that much before, but I think it's, I think it really says something to us that often we find ourselves in a position like that where we can't really figure out what the path is, what's right, what's wrong. And at that point, we may feel miserable, like Arjuna in complete despondency, but it's really or it can be an opportunity, because that can be the point where you can be ready to hear something that maybe you weren't ready to hear before. And another important thing, I think, with this, how this story has been set, is that the first words of the Gita, which is being, it's actually being told by a sage who has the ability to see and hear everything, and he's telling this story to the blind king. And the first words are Dharma Shatra, Kurukshetra, which means the field of Dharma, on the field of Dharma, and on the field of Kuru, which is the actual place where supposedly this battle took place. So I think that's a very meaningful clue to the meaning of the Gita. In other words, it has these two things going on, the kind of inner battle and what the battles, or what we have to live out, how we have to live that in the world. So it's happening in these two places. Some people, commentaries on the Gita I think they're uncomfortable maybe with the idea of this battle that's going to happen and these families slaughtering each other, and they really want to think of it as just kind of the inner battle. But personally, I think it is both things, and that's it's a very important aspect of it. So anyway, at this point, Krishna starts his real teaching, and the first thing that he says to Arjuna is known as Jnana Yoga, which is the yoga of wisdom or of insight. I think it relates most directly to the kind of talk or the kind of study or practice that we do here. And first thing he says to Arjuna is, you sound like a sage, you sound like a wise person, because he's been saying what's dharmic and what's not dharmic, and I can't kill the members of my family and this and that. But he's saying, but you are not truly wise, or you would not be finding yourself in this state of despair and confusion. And then he he goes on with what I always feel is like maybe the hardest teaching of all to really understand, but it's necessary as maybe the first thing we see, and that is talking about the delusion that we have, that we are these, the mind, the ego, the body, rather than, as we often talk about here, as seeing the Buddha nature in both ourselves and others. It's not termed Buddha nature in the Gita, but I think they're really talking about the same thing. So he's saying that you sound like a wise person, but you're mourning but the wise do not mourn for either the living or the dead, because the wise are not identified with this thing, this body, mind, ego that we are also identified with. You hear I'm talking. Thank you. So that's the very first thing that Krishna says to Arjuna. And I was just thinking about this. I was thinking that it's very like in the Eightfold Path that the first thing is right view or right understanding. So having some awareness or some faith in it or some intuitive awareness that there is something other or different or beyond. We're not just limited to this mind, body, ego. So this is the first thing that Krishna tells to Arjuna. And these ideas he goes back to again and again throughout the Gita, kind of coming at them in different ways. And then the second yoga that he starts teaching is called karma yoga. Karma meaning, in this sense, simply action. And that, and involved in this is teachings about duty, which is a very important thing in India even today, and certainly in India then, that Arjuna was born in the warrior caste, the princely caste, and this is a part of his duty, is to protect those people in his kingdom and to protect the Dharma, which is how it's always put, really. And that this is really what this battle is about. You have on one side, really, the Dharma, and I think of this and laugh a little bit because of how we think of, to say in our modern world that God is on your side when you're fighting a war, we've heard enough of that. But literally, God is on the side of the Pandavas. He's right there in the chariot with Arjuna. And the other side really is an embodiment of what they would call in the Gita adharma, or lack of dharma, or lack of righteousness, or if you want to call it evil. I'm not too comfortable with that term. But so this is what the battle is about to be enjoined on these issues. And Krishna essentially says to Arjuna, there is no greater opportunity to one who is a member of this caste, whose duty it is to protect Dharma. There's no greater opportunity than to be here on this battlefield with the opportunity to protect Dharma. So this is karma yoga, and it's talked about a lot in the Gita from different ways. One of the things that it always meant a great deal to me, probably the main teaching that I've talked about in various of the discussion groups, is the idea that one acts without desire for the fruits of one's action. And Krishna says this to Arjuna often in terms of, as a warrior, to go fight without caring, essentially whether you win or lose, without anger, without any of these attachments. But, he's almost like saying, if you become an enlightened being, then you can go out and fight this battle. But another one of the themes that is involved with this, that Krishna keeps coming back to, is the theme of equanimity. And this is very much related, I think, to not wanting the fruits of any of our actions, really. He's saying we all do. We can't avoid doing action in this world, but we should do it without wanting anything back from it, or wanting it to come out in any particular way. And I think that's a really important teaching, and one that's, that we can practice all the time, because these things are coming up all the time. And he says that you can't, and this is where he may be talking to some of the early Buddhist teachings that emphasize a kind of renunciation, that you could renounce the world, you could renounce action, and Krishna says, no, you can't renounce action. In this world, you have to act. So the way to deal with this situation is not by trying to renounce action, but by trying to renounce the desire for the fruits of the action. And then the third yoga that Krishna goes on to teach is bhakti yoga, which is very much involved with devotion, and I think from that with compassion and with seeing the divine everywhere in everything and doing everything as a sacrifice to that, which in a way brings you to the same place as acting without desire for the fruits of the action. If you're doing it just simply as a sacrifice, you're not looking for anything to come back from it. And anyway, I wanted to to read just a few passages from the Gita so that you can get a sense of how Krishna actually says these things. And this is a fairly recent translation I got that I feel is like pretty close to the original Sanskrit. So to just start with when he's talking about a sage, or what this question of equanimity. And he comes back to say again, he comes back to these issues and these teachings again and again, talks about them in different ways, from different angles maybe. So he's talking now about the, Arjuna has asked him about a man of wisdom, whose wisdom is firm and meditation steady. And he asks him, how does such a person speak or sit or move about? Which I like very much just the way that's put, because it's like, he's not asking how does a wise person take care of a difficult person at the job, or handle discipline with his kids or anything, but he's asking the simplest thing. How do they just talk? How do they sit? How do they live in just ordinary, everyday life? So Krishna goes on to say, when a person renounces all the desires in the mind, that one is said to be content in the self by the self and firm in wisdom. The person whose mind is free from anxiety about sorrows and free from greed for pleasures, with rage, passion, and fear gone, whose thoughts are firm, that one is said to be a sage. And this thing also, I forgot to mention another theme throughout is this question of desire and being free from desire, which we certainly recognize in Buddhist teachings. So then, much later, he goes back again to, and he has many times in between this, but again to talk about what a sage or what a wise person is like. And he says, one who is self-contained, for whom pleasure and pain are the same, as are a lump of earth, a stone, a piece of gold, one who is steady, for whom the loved and the unloved are equal, as are praise and blame, the one for whom honor and dishonor are equal, as a friend or enemy who abandons all endeavors, meaning abandoning the feeling that you're doing it, which is another theme throughout. But I think it's important to realize in there, he's not just saying to abandon pain or try to escape from pain, but he's saying the same thing about pleasure. In other words, we have to have this equanimity in both the pleasure and the pain, on both sides. So let me see if there's one or two. Oh, here's one. This is a question about being bound by desire. When one has let go of the fruits of action, one joined to yoga gains full peace. The one not joined to yoga, clinging to the fruit, is bound by actions of desire. So this, as I said, this theme of desire is, he comes back to it in many, many different ways, and it's a real, it's a very important aspect of the Gita. Here again, your authority, and this is Krishna talking to Arjuna, your authority is in action alone and never in the fruits. Motive should never be in the fruits of action, nor should you cling to inaction. In other words, you can't get out of this problem by thinking you can renounce action. Abiding in yoga, which often means in here equanimity, although it's got a number of different meanings, I would say. Abiding in yoga, engage in actions. Let go of clinging, let fulfillment and frustration be the same. For it is said, yoga is equanimity. I think all of this one teaching out of the Gita alone, I have found it can be a lifelong teaching. I feel like you hardly need anything else but to try to live that way according to that vision of the sage that that Krishna talks about. That's just a bare introduction. I hope it made some sense.